Welcome to the scrutiny meeting that is being held in Runcorn today. I'm Dan Price, the Police and Crime Commissioner for Cheshire. Firstly, I want to explain that I am not a police officer. I don't tell the police how to do their day job, but I do check on progress and ask how they're delivering against agreed plans and priorities. I was elected in 2024 to be the public's voice in policing across Cheshire. It's my role to make sure that that people of Cheshire are safe, feel safe, and that they have access to the correct justice services, and that victims' voices are heard. You can find out much more about all the different things my team does by visiting my website, simply Googling Cheshire PCC, and you'll find it. One of the most important things I do in my role is to hold the Chief Constable to account. Today is a formal meeting that is open to the public via Teams and in person. More informal meetings are held in private weekly. Today's meeting will have a set format. Firstly, I will ask how the constabulary are doing on delivering the police and crime plan. And today we will focus on violence against women and girls. I'll be checking in on progress and making sure that the work being done reflects the priorities and concerns of our communities. It's important that women and girls feel safe, whether that's in public spaces, online or in their homes. As Police and Crime Commissioner, I've made tackling violence against women and girls a central part of my plan. That means improving how the police respond, supporting victims better, and working with partners to stop violence before it happens. This meeting is a formal requirement of my role as PCC. While this is an opportunity to be transparent, this is not an open forum. As is usual, I won't be taking any questions from the audience today or from those online. For those joining us via Teams today, you will note your camera, microphone and chat function aren't available during this meeting. However, anyone, as always, is welcome to ask a question by emailing my office in advance of these meetings. The only person asking questions today will be me, and the only person answering questions will be the Chief Constable. Please also note this session is being filmed and it'll be posted online in the next few days. Today in the room from the Constabulary we have the Chief Constable, the Deputy Chief Constable and the Head of Planning and Performance. Can I now move that we agree the minutes? Before I invite the Chief Constable to provide an opening summary, I am aware of footage circulating online which relates to an incident in Crewe yesterday. Mindful that this is a live investigation, can the Chief Constable provide an update on that incident?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. As you rightly point out, this is a live incident. We're well aware of the footage which has been secured evidentially. Officers attended the scene very promptly. I think within 20 minutes or so, the identified suspect had been arrested. He currently remains in custody. We are working through the investigatory process and as appropriate will approach CPS to consider charges. So a very prompt response. I understand fully the concern, the situation raised. We're alive to that, and as I say, we are now working through the due process.
Thanks, Chief Constable. What this shows is that it doesn't matter who you are. If a crime is committed in Cheshire, make no mistake, you will be dealt with by the authorities. Okay, now, Chief Constable, can you please provide your opening summary for today's scrutiny meeting?
Certainly, thank you. Yes, and obviously, as you said, this one features on our approach to violence against women and girls, which is obviously a very broad subject, but one understandably of considerable public concern. What I will say from the outset is I returned to the force in April 21 as Chief Constable, and I think from the outset I made it really clear that two of our key priorities were going to be child protection, looking after vulnerable children, but also our approach to domestic abuse, which I have long considered one of the major threats in society. It happens at a scale that I think most people will be shocked by. The notion that you're not safe in your own domestic setting when most people go there to relax. And we all know that far more people, sadly, die as a result of domestic abuse in intimate partners than strangers. So it's something that we are acutely aware of and focused on. So aside from making it clear that we would have a strong commitment and focus on that, we've acted and in effect put our money where our mouth is. So I established dedicated public protection teams on each area, moving them from headquarters. We have doubled the resource in our OCATE and SOMU teams. OCATE is the online child abuse teams who seek to identify and prosecute paedophiles who are active online and abuse children. And SOMU is the sexual offence management unit. It is one of the probably understandable factors that because we have been so robust in managing online abuse, we clearly bring more people to court, we clearly charge more people, they then go in the system, many of them will obviously then go on the sexual offences register. That means we've had to increase the resource in the people managing sexual offenders. Yeah. So it's one of those things where positive action, but clearly it's led to demand which we need to meet. We have established exploitation teams on each of the areas, which has been a significant reorganisation of our resources. Obviously, having put that focus and effort in, we were really pleased that the HMIC assessment showed the force to be one of the top performing forces in the country, in particular around this area. So we're the only force in the country to be judged outstanding for managing offenders and suspects, and we are one of only 2 forces in the country to be judged outstanding for protecting vulnerable people, which hopefully provides reassurance not just to you but the public that this is something that we treat really seriously. We were recognised for innovative practice around our internal external vulnerability campaigns to upskill officers, staff, partners and the public, our use as well for buddy tags to monitor stalking perpetrators, and I'm sure you'll want to return to the issue of stalking and harassment. We have a clear strategy, performance framework and governance arrangements around vulnerability, and we now have some of the highest charge rates in the country for domestic abuse, sexual offences and stalking and harassment. As well as the criminal justice outcomes, we've increased the use of domestic violence protection notices, sexual harm prevention orders and sexual risk orders, which are all tools in our armoury to try and combat such offences with a broad base approach. We've increased the use of a domestic violence disclosure scheme. We're disclosing more cases and we do this within the required timescales. We have a strong operational focus on safer streets and the nighttime economy, and again, that may well be something that you would like to return to. We have wide-ranging training and development plans for officers and staff, including the use of innovative techniques such as virtual reality headsets. We've taken an innovative approach to modifying our response to VAWG with a range of methods, and hopefully, while there's always more to do and the focus will remain on it, that gives reassurance that we are treating this particular area with due focus.
Thank you for that thorough introductory comments. Can we now please move to slide 5, where I'm now going to commence the questioning against the performance pack. Slide 5 relates to recorded domestic abuse. While the data in these slides are not exclusively about women and girls, the majority of victims are female. This makes the data highly relevant for understanding the scale, impact and response of the crimes that disproportionately affect women. At the same time, it's important to recognise and support all victims, including men. By using this insight to track progress, identify gaps and hold services accountable. Could you please explain the trends in domestic abuse? And in February of this year, there was a drop. Can you explain why that is?
Yeah, I think when we look at the recorded levels of any particular crime type, but in particular ones such as domestic abuse, we need to be really careful when we look at the figures. We have worked hard to encourage people to feel confident to report to us. So that's just one thing to bear in mind, that if figures were really, really low in this area, there'd be some concern actually that they weren't giving people sufficient confidence to come forward with them. Year on year, we've had a reduction of 4.2%. That again, as I say, is something we need to be cautious about. Obviously, if we think there is genuinely less crime occurring and being reported, that's a positive for us. But we are alive to it, so I'm always slightly wary about trumpeting reductions in some crime types, because we want people to come forward and tell us and have the confidence that we will help them. In relation to the drop in February, these numbers do fluctuate. It can be something as simple as February is just a shorter month, there's less days in it, so actually the numbers recorded in it may well be susceptible to that. Paul and our performance teams do monitor, and we use the appropriate statistical measures and checks. This isn't an exceptional drop by any means. It's well within the variance that we would typically see over the course of a year.
No, that's a really helpful explanation. One of the things that really stood out to me through our citizens' assemblies is just how powerful public engagement can be. We've been able to raise awareness and challenge assumptions and help people understand the true scale and the impact of domestic abuse and the wider issue of violence against women and girls. And I would definitely say that there are moments where we share data in this space where you can hear gasps in the assembly because some people are completely unaware of the scale of this. But we're also understanding that in a room such as one of our assemblies, it's entirely feasible that we will have people who are victims and survivors. It's also possible that we've got somebody who may previously or currently be a perpetrator, and we always approach this with that sensitivity and understanding. Can I now move us to slide 6, which is relating to domestic abuse and the outcomes brought to justice. Can you explain what outcome 15 and outcome 16 mean in general terms and why they're so important?
So, we are governed by national rules set by the Home Office around accounting rules for crime recording. There are currently 26 different outcomes that can be applied to a crime. So that's when we've done the investigation. As I say, there's 26, which possibly members of the public will be quite surprised about. They may well think it's either detected or not detected. But there are a range of things which kind of capture some of the complexity around those rules. Outcome 15 is where there are evidential difficulties, but a named suspect is identified. That might be that an allegation's made, someone's named, but on investigation or on consultation with the CPS, there isn't sufficient evidence to have a realistic prospect of conviction. Where that does occur, obviously we will look whether there's opportunities to safeguard the victim, but also whether there's any possible option for intervention with the perpetrator. But if someone's not considered to have committed it, that can be difficult. Outcome 16 is evidential difficulties on victim-based crime. There's a named suspect identified, but the victim does not support police action. That is a particular relevant one, I think, that we see in domestic abuse, as often for many and often understandable reasons, a victim may not wish to pursue an investigation. We will always try and encourage support, wrap things around the victim so that they feel confident to support the prosecution, and where the evidence exists, we will seek to initiate an evidence-led prosecution, which would be where the victim doesn't necessarily support, may have no intention of coming to court, but we think it is the right thing to do to try and seek a criminal justice outcome against the offender to protect the victim. We are very much aided now by the advent of lots of technology, so our officers all wear body-worn video, so if they attend an address, there's clearly something happened. There might be injuries on the victim, there might be scenes of disruption in the house, the general demeanour of people. That might be an example where we would initiate a prosecution based on the body-worn video and maybe the recording of the 999 call to satisfy a court that actually an offence has taken place, and for whatever reason the victim doesn't feel able to support prosecution.
Yeah, I mean, building on that point, what is the constabulary doing to reduce the high proportion of cases ending in outcome 15 and 16, and also how do our rates compare nationally?
So nationally, that data isn't available for VAWG offences. For the year 24-25, for all crime, Cheshire had an outcome 15 rate of 19.5%, considered to a national rate of just over 15%, and outcome 16, ours was 27.5 compared to a national rate of 26.9. In terms of the reassurance around this, this is probably one of the most scrutinised areas of business for the constabulary. There's daily scrutiny of investigations and outcomes. It features on our daily summary for command. There's weekly domestic abuse governance on each area, which is chaired by the superintendent. There is a bi-weekly goal chaired by a chief superintendent. We have really pushed the evidence-led prosecution angle wherever we can. We have working groups with the CPS to reduce the number of action plans on prosecution files and increase early investigative advice. So that's where we're going to CPS and not ping-ponging emails between each other, but try to have a sensible conversation to identify what the opportunities are. We use, as you're aware, domestic violence advocates to try and support people, to keep them supportive of prosecutions, and we have a plethora of campaigns and liaison around domestic abuse to try and encourage, reassure people that we will support them if they come forward and make reports to us.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously vitally important that women and girls feel safe and supported throughout the justice process. Is there anything further that we can do as part of that ongoing support and reassurance?
I think we're always more than happy. Anything we can do to try and offer that reassurance and get people to come forward. So we have groups that work with abuse survivors. We work with charities who have good links in with victims of domestic abuse. So we do try and attack it on all angles to try and give that support. It is always going to be challenging. We're aware of it, but obviously with your support and the support of other groups, we will continue to put that support in place to try and ensure that all the way through the criminal justice system we can get people to stay with the prosecution. One of the things that I think works well with us here in Cheshire, and not all areas have it, is the specific domestic abuse course at Warrington, where we can have magistrates who are obviously well aware of the subject. We have an officer who works in the courts to try and remove those small irritating things in the CJ process that can sometimes throw a prosecution or a court case off track. We try and resolve it at the earliest possible opportunity to get people into court and get them the justice they deserve. So we're always looking for more. We've trained our officers extensively, but anything we can do to reassure people is really important. But I think the message I'd get through, hopefully get across to members of the public who may be looking at this, is we are absolutely committed to tackle domestic abuse. I think the feedback we have nationally from HMIC, others, the number of forces that come and look at what we do, I don't really think there's any force in the country that takes domestic abuse more seriously than we do. Every incident is scrutinised, and we will absolutely try and get the best outcome for the victim.
Yeah, and I think you're right to point out some of those areas where in Cheshire we're doing things that nationally don't exist. And even, as you made reference before about the Peel report, those outstandings are not something that I've seen where the constabulary are complacent. What I've seen is a culture of continuous improvement, very much. Seeing that as always making sure that outstandings become even better, even though Peel won't necessarily give you anything more than you have. I think one of the questions I do have, though, is with regards to how many suspects are there that are linked to violence against women and girls where there's still some sort of outstanding action before they can go through the criminal justice system, and sort of what reassurance can you give that those individuals will always be actively pursued?
Yeah, so I think the first thing to say is that from the very outset, we always seek to take positive action in relation to domestic abuse. So aside from the top line figures around offences brought to justice, charges, we have a whole series of performance measures that we look at, which are really maybe the indicators underneath the bonnet, so we can tell how hot we're running with things. When I came back to Cheshire, and I'll look to Paul to tell me higher or lower from right or wrong, but one of the stats I looked at was when there's a reported incident of domestic abuse, what was the arrest ratio? How many times did we arrest at those? I think it was around 22%. Currently, we will now on a weekly basis look at the arrest rate of somewhere between 55 as an absolute minimum up to 60, sometimes 70% of those incidents. So from the outset, we're taking positive action to reassure the victim that we take this seriously, to send the message to the perpetrator that you're not going to walk out from this. And we know if we take positive action early in an investigation, you've got a far greater chance of securing a positive outcome. So we will really rigorously pursue that angle. In terms of outstanding people at the moment, and bear in mind the significant volumes of domestic abuse we see, there's always going to be some in the system, but currently there are 449 individual suspects outstanding in relation to VAWG offences. This is a 38% reduction on the 723 we used to see in November 2022. So there's always going to be investigations in the system as we need to build the case. What we're determined to do is reduce that to the minimum that are in that pot, if you like, for valid reasons, that we don't want undue delays, we want to be really efficient with our investigation, and I think that reduction figure points to that, but it is something of particular focus. HMIC, in giving us the outstanding grading, commented on our robust governance arrangements for managing suspects and wanted offenders. That is subject to daily scrutiny, weekly scrutiny, bi-weekly scrutiny. One of our prized assets in force is the Serious and Organised Crime Unit, who typically feature on the very most high-end types of criminality, organised crime, drug dealing, firearms offences. But we will often deploy the specialist capabilities they have to go and find offenders wherever they are in the country. So that is an indication about how seriously we take it.
No, it's very helpful, really helpful. I'd now like to move us on to slide 7, which relates to recorded arrests. Yeah. And you have sort of acknowledged even some of this in some of the further questions I've had, but the level of arrests is fairly static. I appreciate the explanation you've given there also refers to a significant improvement on years before you were Chief Constable. I mean, how confident are you that the internal culture within the force supports that zero tolerance of violence against women and girls?
You can never be 100% certain, but everything I see, we monitor, the governance, the feedback we get from staff is gives me a high degree of reassurance that the message has got through on this. We have a robust performance regime, but we never just rely on the numbers, and it's something we push and the deputy push, and Paul on our behalf pushes with all our staff and supervisors, never to rely on the, just get a 55% arrest rate. We always stress the why behind it, and one of the key messages we push on domestic abuse and the reason for positive action is that taking positive action on domestic abuse is homicide prevention. We know that victims typically will suffer repeat victimisation before they even contact the police. So it's really important that when we get that opportunity of intervention, we do everything we can to actually make a positive impact. We've trained staff in domestic abuse awareness. We have taken every possible step we are aware of. We go and hunt out good practice. If anything's identified in another force, we will go and get that. We'll try and introduce it. You'll have seen, I think, the virtual reality headsets, which we've used on a number of things, which kind of include elements on domestic abuse. We have been very proactive in adopting all the Angelini inquiries. I think we're the only force that are entirely compliant on all of the recommendations. As I say, we've put significant effort into training our people. I mean, there's an endless list of training we could go through in terms of RASO first responder training to all our beat, area investigations and response teams. We've had linguistics and DA inputs from a doctor who's expert on it to all our beat and CID. That's an ongoing programme. We have Hydra, which again is an immersive training technique to educate people around domestic abuse and how we can use evidence-led prosecutions. We have internal DA policies about staff coming forward with any concerns. So at every level, we're trying to hit it with as much training as we can. But there is, again, you know, something about walking the walk. I think it's abundantly clear from all of the command team that this is a priority. And again, I don't do it too often, but I don't know what everyone else was doing at 2:30 on New Year's Day. But I was rolling around on the floor at Chester arresting someone for domestic abuse. So hopefully the example will set there from the top all the way down that this is a real priority for us.
And I'd definitely say that, you know, the Chief Constable saying that this is also about homicide prevention, I think that will reassure members of the public who are watching this that is ultimately where you see that this can lead. And I know it certainly is reassurance to me as their voice in policing in the county. I mean, how are you evidencing the internal culture between staff surveys as well and misconduct data and HMIC findings? You know, how are those tools used as well?
Well, we engage with lots of focus groups within the force. HMIC commented specifically about the positive attitudes within the force and the fact that we do take this seriously. We'll take feedback from our partners, stakeholders, the third sector that we work with. We're really alive to it. I speak with the Federation just to get an understanding. They're recently doing some surveys of their own about a variety of things. So we're not complacent. We're focused on this, but you know, genuinely, if there's anything that comes forward that gives us an option for doing it better, we will do, because as we've said, the volumes are quite shocking. It does lead to really serious injury, harm, psychological harm, and in the worst cases, homicide. So it's not something we're going to take our eye off the ball. And it's really difficult to judge what you stop in policing, but we get various national statistics and details, and often the people issuing them are quite loath to let us show them publicly because it kind of can engender some negative commentary. But when we look at the national charts for those forces and how proactive they are in making arrests for domestic abuse, there is a strong correlation with the homicide rate. You know, you'll be pleased to know that our high arrest rate for domestic abuse correlates with a very low homicide rate. So the stats that are there do tend to validate the approach, but you know, we'll take any rounded measures and the softer measures as well about feedback from anyone about how we're dealing with this.
I mean, as PCC, I've made a significant investment on behalf of the public in domestic abuse prevention pilots across Cheshire, but with a very intensive approach in Halton. And behaviour change programmes are a vital part of that. How is the constabulary supporting referrals as part of that programme to maximise the uptake?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that this clearly requires a significant input from policing, but it's not policing's alone to solve. We need other agencies to come forward with referrals, whether that's third sector, health professionals, local authorities, so that we get the referrals in and we can get the appropriate option either to safeguard a victim or to engage in perpetrator programmes. We've now got a dedicated sergeant who's working on that Halton pilot, as you're aware, to really increase the focus and drive on it. They'll be working in the witness council offices as part of a multi-agency team, really to give us that joined up and holistic approach to it. We've restructured our offender management team to better target domestic abuse and those nominals who pose a particular danger, and that again will directly work with that pilot in Halton to make sure that we're joined up. And as you're aware, obviously there's monthly governance through a meeting chaired by yourself and our relevant head of service to oversee that and make sure that we're doing hopefully what we should do to protect the public.
No, that's absolutely true, and I must admit I'm hugely reassured that you sort of recognise that multi-agency approach to dealing with this, and that the constabulary does see itself as an important part of that wider collaboration that's needed to have the impact, but absolutely has sort of led from the front in many cases and set in standards across the whole of the county. Hopefully what we're going to see in Halton is something that is a blueprint that we can roll out across the county so that we can prove to the government that we get this, and that if you want to understand how to break this cycle, come to Cheshire, where we've been doing this for quite some time and are ramping up, not ramping down the efforts. Can I now move us on to slide 10, which relates to domestic violence disclosure schemes. The number of right to ask and right to know appears to be increasing year on year. But what are you doing to ensure the public officers and staff are aware of these rights? And is there anything more my office can do to help?
Well, I'd say the first thing is hopefully the reassurance in the numbers, because clearly more people are aware and more people are confident to partake in schemes because of the numbers. So, as you said, the numbers are increasing, volumes have almost doubled in the last 12 months. We obviously need to ensure there's consistency on these so that they're all assessed and triaged by the vulnerability hub and then sent out to area to ensure that we get compliance within the 28-day delivery, so the 28-day timescale in effect for it. I think we're considerably under that timescale. We about 15 days, so we're almost half the length of time that the national target would indicate, which is obviously a positive. And currently we comply with that timescale in 95% of cases. Some are more complicated. Because of the subject matter, we need to be really careful in terms of some of the information that's disclosed to make sure we get the right outcome. There's a bi-weekly DA Gold chaired by a head of crime who looks at all of them, makes sure the quality is right and checks on the fact that there's no delays in the vulnerability hubs, and obviously we raise them through local partnerships. As I say, I think the reassurance that we're seeing is that more and more people are availing themselves of the schemes and that we're able to comply well within the timescales.
It strikes me that it's an area that is going to require an awful lot of searching and recording and potentially an awful lot of officer or staff time in actually doing that. So maybe it's one of those areas that we see automation opportunities to help speed it up even further at some point.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of the collation of the information to pull it together for a decision maker, we're never going to be entirely able to rely on it because you need the human eye and the experienced human eye to make sure. But I think certainly anything that speeds up that ability to draw in all the information and present it in a format that ultimately a human can make a decision on, that's great. The more effective it means more time our staff can spend on other things such as victim engagement, pursuing offenders, or doing any of the safeguarding measures.
That's great. Okay, can I please move us on to slide 12, which is relating to recorded sexual offences. The data shows that Cheshire has the 12th highest rate of sexual offences out of 43 forces. Does the evidence suggest that this is a particular problem in Cheshire, or is it that this could be down to victims feeling more confident in reporting such crimes? And I know that this is always and often a delicate balance, that as police forces highlight an area, they can also come under attack. So I acknowledge that can happen, but I'd like a little bit of clarification about what the situation is in Cheshire.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't like or think it would be fair for anyone to take away the conclusion that sexual offence is a bigger issue in Cheshire than it is anywhere else. I think we have really been stringent about reporting and recording crimes. We err on the side of record it first and then work backwards. I can't speak for other forces. What I'll say is it's interesting that here, where officers can apply a degree of subjectivity in recording it, and ours clearly do record them, we seem to have higher rates than in other offences where there isn't that subjectivity, and it's a lot harder to not get it right. So this is one where I want to understand the reasons. We continually ask the questions when we get the reports in. We want to understand what type of offending it is it. You know, some of the examples I could point to where we, I think, have done the right thing has probably led to an increase in reporting. So you'd be very aware of our consent campaign in schools, where we seek to educate young people. It was extremely noticeable that when the schools went back after the holidays, we had a significant number of child-on-child reports, where people clearly got back to the school setting where there was a mechanism to report. We're trying to gauge to what degree our education programmes are driving some of that reporting. It's the right thing to do because it gives people the confidence to come forward and seek support and help. So there are plenty of examples where actually doing things to raise awareness, build confidence does lead to an increase in reporting. You'll be well aware of our harm reduction unit. That again, because of our understanding and willingness to take on board complaints of stalking and harassment, that does drive an increased number of reports. So it's very much a double-edged sword about building up that confidence to people will report, but that can drive the numbers. Again, the reassurance I would give you is that sexual offences can come in many different forms. We see, again, I think the public will be surprised at the number of historical reports we get, often relating to family members. Those reports come forward after sometimes decades. So we see those. We see this child on child. Generally, stranger rapes and sexual offences are relatively rare, but there's still too many. We see people who maybe go on a date of some time and that goes awry. So there's a whole range. There's sometimes we see some in the nighttime economy. And the reason I list all those, each one of those requires a different policing approach. So we need to understand the nature of offending so we can apply the appropriate mitigation. So if, for example, there's a series of sexual assaults in a licensed premises, well then that's an option that we can pursue around the management of that licensed premises. If there was repeat incidents in a particular area, we would increase the number of patrols. So we do delve into them. We don't just look at the top line figures, and we try and apply the bespoke measure to deal with the actual nature of the offending.
Yeah, I mean, I've been pleased to see some of the charge rates that we have in Cheshire in this area, and I've no doubt a high level of charging has an impact on trust and confidence for victims and survivors, and I've also no doubt that in some parts of the country where there is charge rates of sub 3% in this space, that also must have an impact on trust and confidence in this space in a negative way. So I must admit, I have been impressed by the work of the constabulary in this space, and pleased for the public of Cheshire that in some cases they don't live in other areas of the country where charge rates are woefully low. Could we now maybe move on to slide 14, which relates to prevention orders relating to sexual offences? The use of prevention orders have significantly increased from 12 to 76 in a year. What intelligence or operational shift has triggered this? And how are you ensuring these orders are being used effectively and not just as a blunt tool to manage risk?
Yeah, I mean, these are part of the armoury of measures that we would seek to apply. So obviously we'll always seek for a prosecution, but in some cases some of the orders are more appropriate means. The orders themselves have to go through our legal department, who will apply stringent tests. They'll then go forward to court. So the normal checks and balances that you would imagine are in place with these. So there's not something we will willy-nilly dish these out as a soft option. These are part of a range of measures that are used in a bespoke fashion depending on the specific nature of the circumstances. You know, we're trying to use them in more innovative ways. So on occasions we will go for the sexual risk orders where someone has been bailed, for example, for an online abuse investigation. Sometimes people end up on bail for those for quite some time. If the charge, you can manage them to some degree with bail conditions. As an alternate, we'll use the sexual risk order to moderate someone's behaviour until we can get to the actual court process. So they are not something that are easy to come by. You know, this is a specific order that we need to justify. You'll be aware of the strain this places on our legal services team together with the domestic violence notices. So these are not something that we just embark on lightly as a soft option. These are hard work to get, but we believe they're a really important tool in the broader armoury to deal with sexual offences. And I'm delighted that the increased numbers, it shows that we're considering all the options and really trying to turn every stone over to get some sort of positive outcome and protect the victim.
And are you expecting the increase that we've seen in the last year, are you expecting to see that year on year, or do you believe we're going to reach a point where we've actually got to a sort of a peak and it will plateau?
It's really difficult to say, Commissioner. You know, are we ever going to get to the stage where we get every sexual offender? Unfortunately not. I think we'll probably plateau at some stage because we've had such a significant increase. So difficult to say. I think it will slow down. I wouldn't expect to see the exponential rise year on year. I think our legal services hope it probably slows down because there is the capacity issue. But if it turns out it's the right thing to do, then I'll come to you for a bit more budget for the legal department.
Okay. Shall we appreciate that answer? Shall we move on to slide 15, which relates to the recording of stalking and harassment? What is the constabulary doing to proactively tackle street harassment of women and girls? And how are you ensuring that victims feel confident that reporting these incidents that are often under-recognised and under-recorded?
So I think probably at the top end of the constabulary's response is the harm reduction unit, who specifically deal with stalking and harassment. You'll be well aware that I think we've received, rightly so, national accolades for Dave Thompson, the DS in there, and the team. You'll be aware that we've got an embedded psychologist and other professionals to really try and give the best possible service on these difficult crimes. And, you know, we've picked up investigations where someone's maybe crossed force boundaries and the victim's probably not at the best service in another place, but we'll pick that up, deal with it, and hopefully fully grasp the impacts of this type of offending on ruining someone's lives, really. So I think that higher end service, you know, we're in a really good place and there's lots of people coming to see what we're doing. I think currently there's 4 stalking and harassment units in the country, similar to ours. I'm quite staggered that only 4 out of 43 forces do it. I know the policing minister, previous policing minister, visited us not long ago and she was really impressed with it, and again probably posed the same question. So I think that's a really big strength for us. In terms of the broader stuff, in terms of protecting women and girls who are out and about, sometimes in the nighttime economy, we'll try and look at anything and everything we can do to protect people. So we identify best practice in another force, Thames Valley or Bedfordshire, the Vigilant.
Yeah.
This is an operation where we have officers, some in plain clothes, some in uniform, who will be out in the nighttime economy looking for predatory behaviour. We train CCTV operators, people in licensed premises, really to try and educate them of the signs to look out for. We recently ran an operation in one of our town centres where the team identified 4 males coming to the town centre as a group. As they got into the main bit of it, split up to work independently, probably about 4 o'clock in the morning. They'd not been drinking, and then they separately moved around targeting groups of females, and then when they found the group, all came together again. So because we'd monitored it, we were able to intervene before anything went untoward, but the warning's there for people in the nighttime economy. We do have plainclothes officers in the nighttime economy looking for predatory behaviour. The CCTV operators are well alive to it, and people in bars and clubs, etc., are also well aware of it. In addition to that, Safer Streets 4, range of methods on that, including education to schools. We have the safety buses that will go out in nighttime economy to be a safe haven for anyone, but particularly females in particular, should they need any support or just somewhere to drop into when they're on a night out. We've, trained people in all manners of the nighttime economy, schools. We've worked with the beauty and leisure section as another opportunity for people to come forward and report to us and get advice. There's the Hollyguard app, which we've supported getting out to people to try and make sure that they feel secure when they're out and about. So there's real range of it. This is something we're very alive to and absolutely recognise the debilitating effect that sometimes the behaviour of men can have on women and girls when they're out and about in places where they should feel safe.
I think the policing crime panels took a very sort of keen interest in the work of the HRU in relation to stalking, and I know we've had informal meetings in great detail and formal meetings around it, and you're right to reference officers who've been given the highest recognition in policing because of the amazing work that happens here in Cheshire. I would also agree with that fact that too few forces have something of that nature. And actually, I think it's fair to say that even those that do aren't all operating at the same level as what we see here in Cheshire. I know one in particular, the multi-agency approach that we've got, is not working as well as it should. And I've had conversation with the PCC in that area specifically about that. So I think it is fair to say that we are a national blueprint when it comes to stalking. It's one of the reasons why we got that STAR funding, because the government is going to make investments in areas of the country that are leading the way, as you would expect. I must admit, I've also been reassured around the nighttime economy of work and how we've got plainclothes police officers out in our town centres. This is something that's been raised at citizens' assemblies, because this is one of those areas of crime which is quite often understood. I'd also say, as a man, it's something that it's hard for me to maybe necessarily understand as well as it is for a woman. But I've been, again, hugely impressed by ACC Ross, a female in senior leading policing, which I think bolsters the great work that senior leaders who are men are also doing. It brings that perspective that I think the public worry isn't there in policing. I'm pleased it is in policing here in Cheshire. And then I'd probably sum up on the Hollyguard app. That is something which I think is a game changer for people who are at risk. And it's something that Cheshire has championed for quite some time now. So I would commend the work that the Constabulary has done around that app. It's one of the reasons why the Policing Crime Plan talks so much about modernisation, because in many cases, some of the challenges that we're facing now, and decades ago, we didn't have the tools to maybe deal with as effectively as we are today. And I think that's probably also true when we talk about the use of video technology now, which again, we didn't have quite as often as we do today.
Yeah, I mean, there's also the Good Sam application, so if someone's concerned, they can ring the control room. click on a link and it gives us immediate access to a very accurate location, but also the camera on their device, which has been used to good effect in numerous ways. And I fully understand your point. It's difficult as a man to get the perspective of a female and what it's like in some scenarios. What I would say is that in terms of, you know, the police team, as with everyone, we've got families.
Sure.
I'm a father. I've got 2 daughters. You know, I've gone through the stage of where if they're out for a night out, I don't drink. I have my phone by the bed, just in case. You know, so we're not oblivious to this. Yeah. We all have exactly those same worries and concerns, and it's very real for us all about doing our utmost to make sure people feel safe.
I welcome that sort of personal reflection that as Chief Constable you can give, because I think there's members of the public out there that need to hear words like that from a Chief Constable, because it absolutely reassures them that whilst you're a public servant, you're a human, you're a father, you know. So thank you for sort of emphasising that. It does make a difference, I think, for building that trust and confidence. That ultimately brings to an end my questions relating to today's performance pack and the thematic around VAWG. I do have some final questions, which again don't relate to the pack, but are connected to my policing crime priorities. So in relation to modernise, what is the constabulary doing to modernise its approach to violence against women and girls using AI and technology, particularly in relation to that recent STAR funding bid? Appreciate some of this you have just answered, but I wonder whether you can shed further light on that.
So, obviously in reference to STAR funding, we've also mentioned the harm reduction team and the fact that it's a bastion of expertise not replicated everywhere in the country. In effect, that's welcome funding, but we're doing some of the heavy lifting here for the rest of the country. So that potentially is a tool which will enable people to identify worrying behaviour in an automated way, cut down time, and hopefully get more of the right decisions. So, you know, the funding's welcome, but we're doing the heavy lifting for the rest of the country, which we don't mind doing because it's the right thing to do. I mentioned the Good Sam application, again, as we've said, which has been embedded now in the force for a couple of years, working really well. Some innovation isn't necessarily technology, so as a force we've invested in our police dog capability. So we have trained dogs, not obviously in the traditional stuff, but we've also got digi-detection dogs. So these are dogs that can in effect find a chip in a house. So obviously if we're looking for people hiding illegal material, they're useful for that. Interestingly as well, we found a tracking device on someone's car using the DigiDog. We've got our Seminal detection dog, which has been deployed. Incredible asset for us, April and a handler. You know, we lent that to a neighbouring force for a stranger rape on a schoolgirl in an open area in the snow, and the dog identified the semen deposited at the scene that led to a prosecution. You know, I think there's only 2 forces that have got the Seminal detection dogs. So again, tremendous asset for us, and just shows that broader approach in an innovative way. Recently re-energised and redone our spiking campaign, particularly with students coming back. So the awareness about that for them, and obviously licensed premises, the use of tags for stalking and protection orders to support them, to give victims greater confidence in relation to the management of offenders. In terms of our management information, not as exciting, but the Power BI stuff that we use to pull together that performance information to make sure that people are doing what we expect them to do. You'll be well aware of the Safer Streets programme. Part of the capability on that is the DITAX functionality, which pulls together relevant information to generate patrol plans and to make sure that our people are where we think they're going to be. So there's a whole range of things that hopefully the technology makes us more efficient, but it's only going to work if we've got the right attitude. you know, I think you can be really confident the force has got the right attitude about this particular area where we need to keep people safe.
That sort of brings me on to a question that I do have with regards to workforce and culture. I mean, I'm intrigued to know the proportion of frontline staff that have completed violence against women and girls related training, and how its effectiveness is being evaluated. And this is also something that the Police and Crime Panel have took a real interest in understanding more about.
So we have done training to all our frontline staff around domestic abuse. So the DA Matters training, 1,929 officers have attended. So that's nearly 2,000 of the total establishment at 2,410. That now, all the student officers get that training now as part of their development. So that keeps us up to date with that. Another 52 officers and staff have had training to be champions, to actually deliver the staff and really champion the message. Between April and August this year, all the area investigation teams and response officers have received the College of Policing RASO training, that's rape and serious sexual assaults. That includes all the best practice from Obsteteria, which is the national programme, and 907 officers, nearly 1,000 officers have attended that. VAWG training is also embedded in all our frontline and middle line leaders course, where they get a good understanding of the national reports and detail and get various inputs from subject matter experts. So I think at all levels of the force we're trying to hit it, and this is one of those things that is just a constant need. You know, I think the day we think we've nailed this and everyone knows everything they need, we're going to be very complacent and trip ourselves up, so it's just a continual effort.
I mean, one of the areas that I think is often misunderstood in this space is that violence towards women and girls is incorrectly viewed as a more urban related crime. And I understand in many cases it's connected to the nighttime economy, and obviously that is obviously much more active in our urban areas than our rural areas. I sit on the National Rural Crime Network, and this is something that we are talking more about, how rural communities are affected. They're often much more isolated, so it's often challenging for victims and survivors to access services because of that isolation that happens in some of our rural areas. So I'm keen to understand what percentage of our officers in the Rural Crime Unit have completed specialist training related to VAWG. So,
I mean, you're quite right that there's no one-size-fits-all around this type of criminality. So, you know, affluence, rural, urban, doesn't matter. You know, this is types of crime that affect everyone. So it would be wrong to try and typify it in any way. In terms of the specific question around the rural crime team, as the name suggests, have specific responsibilities around that liaison with the local rural communities, rural crime, heritage crimes. They wouldn't typically be the people who respond to reports. So they've had the general awareness training to pick it up, but the specific training is the people who would deal with it, which is response beat teams and the area investigation teams, because they're the people who, in truth, are going to be dealing with any reports of domestic abuse, in particular in rural communities.
But it's fair to say that our rural crime unit are aware of what the signs of VAWG look like, and will make interventions where necessary.
Absolutely. I mean, the police officers.
Exactly.
So,
right.
You know, rural crime's the specialism, but they've got the same awareness training as everyone else. But in terms of the people who would turn up if a member of the public called us, that would be the response team, not the rural crime team. Of course, if they come across it, or if in dealing with someone they've built up a relationship and something gets identified to them, then yeah, I'm perfectly happy that they pick it up and signpost it in the right way.
So my last question really relates to best practice, and we've spoken quite a lot about examples of best practice that we've seen in Cheshire. I suppose I wanted to use this as an opportunity. Is there something that you believe we haven't already covered in this area of VAWG, where you think it's an opportunity to maybe highlight some of the important work that is happening in Cheshire?
I think we've covered an awful lot. I mean, we're doing some really good work with CPS around a charging pilot around domestic abuse, which is seeking to streamline the bureaucratic burden on officers and lawyers, actually, in where someone's potentially going to plead guilty or guilt's obvious, an early charging decision, so we can get them into court, get them in front of the magistrate or judge and deal with it quicker. That's better for the victim. We'll get more positive outcomes. And I think that's really testament to the strong relationship we've got with Mersey and Cheshire CPS, who are our lawyers. I think more embedding of the advocates. I'm not going to give you the same list again, Commissioner, because I think we've covered most of them. But I think the one thing that probably we haven't touched on was that work with the CPS, actually, to make sure that we can do our bit. But if it doesn't work properly through the CJ system, then it kind of falters.
I know certainly at Criminal Justice Board, which I chair, the sort of the blockages in the criminal justice system is too often resulting in a real sense of injustice for victims and survivors. So I think the fact that we have been given the opportunity in Cheshire to make charging is a real opportunity to sort of make sure that victims are served first, as opposed to what often are sort of failures within the system, which feel sometimes sort of stretched. So I really welcome that highlighting of that point. That does ultimately conclude our meeting today. I think we've had a really thorough meeting where we've covered quite a lot. I'm sure I'll continue to get more questions from the public on this, rightly so. And I'm pleased that on Saturday we start our Citizens' Assembly in the Macclesfield LPU. So I've no doubt we will be having more and more that comes directly out of that, which we'll be sharing with you. Can I thank you for your time today in answering these thorough questions, and see you at our next meeting, if not before.
I'm sure I'll see you before.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Thanks.